I think when it goes like this, the broadcast is live.
There
Hello.
it is.
Hi,
There it is.
San Francisco Aquarium Society. This is Jerry Leanne, your program manager here. Today we have a very special guest. This is our second talk. The second time we're viewing you through YouTube right now. And so please, if you at any point have any questions, please post them in the comments section or the chat section, and then we can actually see them. We'll pull them. We'll ask Tom some questions. But first, I gotta introduce who our special guest is here today. It is none other than Tom Barr, known for his planted tanks and a little background about Tom before he jumps in. He's maintained aquariums as a business for many years. He first started collecting plants in 1977. That's right, 43 years ago. Started throwing them into tanks, seeing how they'll do. But in 1989 is when he really started to get into the planted tank. And then in the last 20 years, he's really now started to focus into the art of design of a planted tank. And he has a great website, barreport.com, to have all this information to share with everyone. So with nothing more to say, take it away, Tom.
Thank you. I was asked to kind of talk a little bit about maintenance, maintaining these tanks for this particular talk. I think the board was sort of interested in it. You can ask me, kind of any question sort of as kind of going through, or you want me to sort of just go ahead and type it in the chat, and I'm good with that. Works well. I do Zoom for my classes too. I teach horticulture at community college here, so I'm used to this format. A lot of folks aren't, but it has good points and its bad points. Generally, I'm just going to kind of talk about it in the short sort of segments of daily, weekly, and sort of monthly routines. There's actually probably a yearly routine where we actually just break the tank completely down, remove the soil, add soil back, and aquascape it again. And I'll talk about that sort of towards the end. But I'm going to start with the short sort of time frames, generally speaking, with daily maintenance here. A lot of people, they like to dose daily. They feed their fish daily. They can feed their plants the fertilizers daily. I always sort of check that CO2 tank pressure because it always gets me. And it runs out, and then my tank just not looking quite right. And then I look over, I ran out of gas. Run out to the garage, grab a new tank, switch out the tanks, and get back to growing plants again. Sort of the second thing, this thing I probably do quite a bit, is just remove any dead or decaying plants, anything that uprooted. This sort of leftover plant material, sort of half rotten, things like that. That does, I think, I've heard other people say this, and I've actually added like rotting plants, old plants back to a tank and some other tanks in the past just to see if I could recover some of those plants. Didn't work too well, but I did induce the algae. I can't say, definitively that those leftover decaying leaves and things like that cause algae in all tanks. I can't say that definitively. I've seen some really lean tanks where I'm, out in my garage where I don't dose them at all. I don't do water changes. They get a fair amount of leaf drop just because it is so limited, and the plants will lose some of their leaves just because of that really limited system. I have a soil in there, so the plants are still getting something from the soil, but it's pretty lean. So it gives off these decaying leaves and everything like that, but those leaves seem to be recycled by the plants really fast. And I think maybe if you did a lot of leaf drop in a more enriched tank, something else would probably go wrong, and that might overload the system. But in the leaner systems, it doesn't seem to cause a problem. It seems just more of the faster growth tanks, things like that, where the light's higher, something like that might be causing that algae. I I can say what algae doesn't do, but it's very difficult to say why it grows specifically. You have to try and induce it, and you need to induce it in pretty much all in all cases. That way you can be sure. You can say, well, then we can say, well, this is what causes algae. Sometimes you'll try something and maybe it works for you, and then somebody else tries the same thing and it doesn't. And so, no one gets caught like that with a lot of this stuff. I find myself doing that, being a skeptic of myself, and or this says this. Can I say that? Is that true or not? And that's good sort of thinking to have, especially with things like shrimps or reef tanks, or pretty much anything. It's good to ask those kind of questions. Another thing I probably do is, I'll check the water temperature. I usually stick my hand in there and I can tell if it's if it's off a little bit. Your hand can tell, maybe a degree difference between water. It's actually quite good at that. It can't tell you the, 82 degrees versus 83, but it can tell the difference between those two. And one's a little cooler, one's a little warmer. Generally speaking, that's mostly a winter thing. In the summer, we keep it, basically about 78 to 80 degrees inside here. I'm in Sacramento, so it gets quite a bit hotter here. Well, I don't know, maybe some East Bay places, and San Jose gets pretty hot too. Clean that aquarium glass sometimes if I make a mess, or the floor. And I top the water levels off, things like that. If it's doesn't have a sump. And then I feed the fish. I always feed the fish, try and do that. That sort of adds fertilizer too. So I'm like, oh, I forgot to add fertilizer. Well, at least I'll feed the fish. And their poo will give off some, nitrogen waste, and the plants will go, yummy, take it up. I think one thing about, kind of maintenance, especially with planted tanks, it's kind of a love-hate thing where you have, well, I love doing it. It's therapeutic. I'm getting in this groove. I have to get in kind of a mood to do it. And then I'm planting and redoing things, cleaning. There's a certain, therapy, I think, and all that, and gardening, horticulture. And it's not just in aquariums, it's in bonsai, or, growing your vegetables outside in your raised bed, growing ornamental plants in your front yard, whatever it is. It's very therapeutic, I think, for a lot of folks. But sometimes I hate it too. I love it in a certain way, but a lot of times, you're like, damn it, I don't want to do it. I'm not in the mood, and I'm just going to let it go. And I have tanks like that. I have non-CO2 planted tanks that do really well with a lot of neglect. And then the whole thing out there in the garage with those tanks that don't get any fertilizers, they don't get any dosing, they don't get any water changes. They use sponge filters with air driven, but they have CO2 and they have sort of moderate light. They do quite well, but I haven't changed the water for at least 6 months at a time on those. And every once in a while, I'll add a little sprinkle, maybe some ferts, but I'm adding the food for the shrimp. I have a bunch of shrimp. That's what I do with my leftover shrimp. But those tanks, I didn't want to do a lot of gardening or anything else. It's just sort of a place to put the excess plants, or to grow something out so I can switch something around in the main tanks. And so I never really had the goal to do all this maintenance out there. That wasn't my intent. My intent for that was inside. But even there, sometimes I'm not too into it. But when I am into it, well, then I got to sell these plants because they grow. You're trimming them off, and I'm like, oh well, now I've got all this extra plant mass. Well, I got to start selling it too. So it's like a double thing where you're getting the therapy, but then you're getting some money. Maybe that's a motivator for you. Some people, I think it is. it's one reason why the auctions are very popular in most fish clubs. And that's what I did back in the 90s. I kept bringing in the maxed, I think it was like 15 items that you could put in the auction back then. And, I bring in a different type, 15 different plants also. And so folks would buy quite a few. And then I'd come in and buy, Dick Al and his leftover discus that he didn't want, that were low grades. They look great to me. So I'd go home with a bunch of, $5 discus that were yay big back then, and put them in my planted tank. And I said, hey, these things are easy. Everybody said they were hard, and they're eating like pigs, and they're doing well. And I was like, wow, this is kind of cool. So it can go either way. You can love it or hate it. And most clients, I find, one thing they're going to probably neglect the most is the water change. And the water change, that's one reason why I do automated water changes for most of my clients. And they kind of, sometimes they balk a little bit at it, but generally speaking, most of them come around to it in pretty much all cases, because it reduces your maintenance. And if you're hiring a maintenance company to come in and do it, it's going to cost a lot of money over time. And it doesn't matter if the guy's just charging you $100 per visit or $500 a visit. It's going to add up over time. And usually after about 5-10 visits, you could have paid for a plumber to put all the material you need for that right in there, and then the aquarist could come in and fix it and plumb it so it does an automatic water change. Works really well with sumps, and you just have a hole on the top of the sump up near the lip, and that's where the water overflows and goes down to the drain. And then you just have a small pump, maybe turn on for a half hour a day, and it pumps the water out. And then you just have a little float valve, just like a toilet. It's basically like flushing a toilet. Water drains a little bit, and then it fills back up and stops once that float valve shuts off the water. It's very simple. There's other methods though too. One is, I talked to a guy yesterday about this, just putting in a reverse osmosis unit and just dribbling the water in, no float switches at all, and just have that hole up top of the sump just flow right in directly into the drain. And you just dribble that RO water into the suction side of the return pump, and then all that water coming down from the sump will go out that drain, whatever flow rate that is, and it just balances out on its own. It's like a slow, continuous water changer. You can do that with tap water too, but in most cases, I've done it with the RO water, and then you could have a little dosing pump for the fertilizers or whatever. But that works pretty well. Both those work well. You can do sort of similar things with canister systems, tanks without sumps. You can do that as well. I usually drill a hole in the tank and just have a pipe sort of up near the very tip, and it just drains over. Or they have a custom cut notch in the corner of the tank, and then it just flows over into a pipe and then goes down the drain, and you just have the water that way. And you have a small little pump that pumps it out if you want to do a daily thing or a continuous thing without the pump. So usually those are continuous, the ones without the sumps. But the sumps sort of, I think you get a little better water change in effect if you do the little pump that goes on for 30 minutes or so, drains 10% of the tank and does a water change, basically 10% per day. If you have chlorine, things like that in your tap water, it's a good idea to use a pre-filter for that water that's coming into that float valve, and it'll remove most of the chlorine, chloramains, things like that. I usually get the 4-inch size water filters, big tall one for most of my clients because they have large tanks and they're changing a fair amount of water. I change those out about every 2-3 months, something in that range. So that's the way that works. Weekly maintenance, I'm talking about water changes, 40%. Some people say 30, some people say 20. If you're going to do a water change, you may as well do a big one. That's always been sort of my take on this. Some people are like, well, I only want to do 20. It seems to help better. It's like, well, plants in my experience, and that's quite a bit of experience, love water changes. I haven't seen any plants that don't like them. And they do quite well when you do big water changes. You expose them to the air, things like that. It also sort of causes a lot of the algae not to grow as well also. And even you can see it on your aquarium too, the line where that water change is. There's this nice hard algae on your glass, a lot of your plants and hardscape. And above that line, it's pretty clean. And so, you have fish in there too, so you don't want them flopping on the gravel either. You want to go 95% or something like that. But generally, I'll do about 50 to 80%. At least try and do it at least weekly. If I'm really kind of trying to garden and aquascape, things like that, I'll do it twice a week. I'll do 50, 80% twice a week. And then I'll probably only add the fertilizers after the water change. And then, because I'm doing it only twice a week, and then 3 days later, I'm going to do another water change. So I can keep a real tight control on how much fertilizer's in that tank, as well as keep it really, really clean. But it also drives the plant growth to incredible levels because you're exposing it to the air for just a brief amount of time. Plants love that. Bacteria also love that. It also gives you a good chance to get your arms in the tank. It's very underrated, the arm in the tank kind of thing. People talk about maintenance a lot, but if you spend a fair amount of time cleaning, picking, trimming, getting every little bit of dirt out, getting the scape right where you want it, there's a lot to be said for that. I think it's always been very underrated. Just keeping your arms in the tank and cleaning things, that kind of thing. A lot of times people say it's, you need to do the water change to prevent organic buildup, organic waste. I don't know about that, if that causes algae or not, because, I've got those tanks out in the garage in 6 months and no water changes, and there's no algae in those. Especially two of them. Two of them might get a little green spot algae on the glass. Plants are still pretty clean, things like that. But, generally speaking, though, there should be lots of algae because I don't do any water changes there. I think it's probably more, the water changes are more for just sort of balancing out the fertilizers and the dissolved salts that are in the tank more than anything. That's probably more along the lines of what's going on there. Check the equipment, filter, light, things like that. I really watch CO2 probably the most. That's the biggest driver of growth. That'll change the growth rates by 10, 20 times. Nitrogen, probably 2 to 4 times tops. As far as growth rates. I mean, if you really limited it, and just take all the nitrogen out, well, maybe, you can get more limitation than that. But generally speaking, CO2 is the big one. So if you see any sort of sudden stoppage of growth, do a water change, check the CO2. Those are the two biggest ones. Water changes can also get you through algae problems. They can get you through CO2 problems as well. If you do them frequently, every 2 or 3 days, things like that also. Other thing I like to try and do is clean that glass, keep it nice and clean. The hardscape, plant leaves, anything like that. If anything's looking ugly, trim it, pull it out. If you get that large amount of algae kind of going on, you better start looking at reducing your light or looking at the CO2 levels. And then you increase your amount of water changes. You go to twice a week instead of once a week or once a month, whatever it is that you're doing. You generally will up it. Clean the algae out, short-term solution, stopping the algae from growing, sort of the long-term solution. So how do you do that? Well, grow the plants. Most people, I got to kill this algae, but no, you need to grow the plants. That's really what it is. And till folks sort of get that and sort of understand that, I mean, even professional folks and folks have done it for 20 years, and I got to kill this algae, but they know in the back of their mind, they got to grow the plants. That's really what it's about. You do that, and then you don't have not too many algae problems, not real serious ones anyways. They're just sort of minor annoyances at that point. I tell people to use scissors, although I'm guilty of using my fingers quite a bit. Scissors work good for certain plants that are real sort of tough and hard to cut. Anubis, Buse, some Ericarylons are kind of tough. I'll use razor blades for splitting things like hard things like the rhizomes of sword plants, Chinodoris, some Ericarylons I'll use also. I'll split them that way. I often, suggest folks trying that twice a week, 50, 70% dose after. It's a lot of work, but you get a lot of results out of it, and it works quite well. The other thing is, if you're growing these plants really well, you're going to have plenty of trimmings and leftovers to sell. And that's a big factor for folks. You can do it online. You can do it on Facebook. You can do it with the clubs, the fish stores, things like that. Algae, to get algae off, I'll use about any tool. For things like Cladophora and stuff that's sort of embedded in moss or whatever, I'll do pretty brutal, removal of the moss. I'm not going to save the plants. Just take out a little bit and then it just keeps coming back for weeks or months or years. I'm going to rip out most of the plant and just grow it back again. And then I'll often use tweezers to pull out Cladophora, say out of some types of plants, say like Ricciardia. It can get in there and cause a lot of sort of headaches for folks. The big one really is there's this red ornamental, red algae, red moss, sometimes they call it, and it's sort of burgundy color. If it's sort of that yellowish color, I've seen sometimes that means that they've been adding Excel or something else to it, and it's not happy. If it's a dark, rich sort of burgundy color, and it sort of has sort of these little blades, and they branch off and sort of in this dichotomous pattern, and they're flat. I think it's Cologlossia, something like that, or Cologlossia, something like that. Anyways, I got some many years ago from a friend from Indonesia. I thought it was cool. Oh, great, cool looking. We thought it was a liverwort back then, and then we looked at it. I got a hold of it. I know this is a red alga. And I haven't been able to get rid of it since. And so people, I want that, and use it for aquascapes and stuff. But once you get it, it's really hard to get rid of, especially if you have Buse and some other plants and wood. And it's migrated. I've gotten it out of certain tanks, but I still got it in one tank. I still can't quite get rid of it. The worst one though is probably bladderwort. And that's sort of the sort of one of the worst. I would call it the worst weed in the hobby. It's a true plant too. There's no sort of chemical way to get rid of it. And so you got to hand pick this little string that's real fragile and breaks into many little pieces and auto fragments out of your tank. And that's very difficult to do with a lot of different plants. Some plants are easier. Stem plants that grow really fast, you can just chop off just the very tips, toss the rest of it, vacuum that area out, plant the tops, and then you're all right. Something like a bunch of rare Ericarylons, get down in between each one of the needles. You never know. and then it comes back, a week or a month later after you spent, 6 hours picking it all out. And it's no fun. A lot of people sort of say, use this algicides, XL or glutaraldehyde. I don't use that much at all. I've kind of gotten away from it completely, and for a lot of things. Let's go down a little bit on this. Go to the next page. There we go. I'll use peroxide a lot of times. It's cheap, and I can see it working, and I can see its results quite quickly. And I'll usually do this during a water change, and right before I start filling things back up below that level, the water, I'll spot treat with a pipette. I'll just squirt a little bit on, say, a blood vomit, a little sort of Eric Carillon type of spiky plant. Maybe got a little black brush algae or something when I forgot to change the tank, gas tank when it ran out. So I'll squirt a little bit on there, wait a minute or two. It'll start bubbling up. And then I might do that two or three weeks, and it's pretty much gone after usually a week or two, where you've gotten the CO2 back, you've spot treated, things like that. Above the water line, then I can use anything. I can use XL, I can use peroxide, whatever, and just sort of mist it on real quick. Give it a 15 seconds and spray it with regular water, something like that. You got a lot more options above the water. You can hit it directly and then nail it. Just use it with caution though. Don't be spraying your rare plants and stuff with this stuff, because it'll roast them up pretty good. Do it lightly or dilute it when it's above the water. You're still going to get really good results from sort of killing the stuff that's on the leaves, things like that. The other thing you do is, like, for a lot of those tougher leaf plants like buces and anubis, you can let the leaves dry out a little bit. And that pretty much does the trick. It does quite a good clean looking plant after doing some big water changes and allow it to dry out a little bit. And I have an example in this sort of talk that I'm doing. You can scroll down a little bit. That's just like a old style of sump that I had at one point, and I was using the wet dry filters. This is a CPR 900 or something like that. I sealed the top up here because I don't want gas exchange. Water comes in, hits this, and then the CO2 degasses, but it has nowhere to go, so it goes back into the water. And then it comes back here and gets sucked out here, so it's not getting degassed. The only place it might be getting degassed is right where it sort of spills over into the pipe from the pre-filter, something like that. This is just a simple homemade CO2 regulator valve solenoid. This is just a Victor single stage regulator, all brass. This is just a Burkett 6011 valve that I wired myself. A nice Whitney, or it might be a swag lock. And then there's a nice swag lock check valve in there also. And this just goes straight into the pump and gets chopped up. And then 6 feet later, it comes back to the tank, and it's pretty well dissolved by then. Might be a little mist in there. So what I've done sort of recently is just I'll send it through a little pump, and it'll come in, grind it up, put it through a water filter, and then that water filter will feed back in here. So it's like a CO2 reactor. Then I don't get any mist coming back, and the tank looks pretty crystal clear. Okay. Let's see. Not a problem. Was planning to listen. Okay. All right. Be great if we could find a picture. Is that the moss? Yeah. You can just search, sort of a red moss for aquariums in Google for planted tanks, and it'll pop up. It's quite common. It's often sold. I don't think it's a particularly good thing to sell though. For the hobby. I understand people, wanting something different, or it's red moss, all that, but it can get loose and really tough to get rid of, especially on buces, anubis, things like that. Plants that generally are kind of high value and slower growing. Monthly maintenance. I usually do this for most clients. I'll clean out the filters really well. Filter media. A lot of people are worried about killing their bacteria or stuff like that, but in planted tanks, it really doesn't matter. I haven't found that to be the case. If you use the filter socks, a good way to clean those. Yeah, there it is. That stuff looks pretty, but then it starts popping up everywhere. It is pretty though, and when I saw it, I was like, oh, I want some too, and then damn it. This color is a little bit jazzed up. Maybe it looks good in under certain lighting, but under a wide range of T5s and LEDs I've tried, it looks kind of duller than this, kind of like a crypt, like the crypts. Their leaves, kind of that same sort of not really red, but sort of a brownish red. This would be nice if it stayed that way and didn't just kind of grew as a ball outward, but it doesn't. It sends little bits and pieces and it fragments, and then you get stuff popping up all over. And it does attach to plants quite strongly. I've tried picking it off the buse, and you got to cut that whole piece off of the buse to do it. But canister filters, generally, if you can clean those once a month or maybe once every 2 months at least, don't let them go more than 3. That's a good idea. Sometimes I'll put the pre-filters on canisters or on the lily pipes, things like that. I'll put a little sponge on there, and that'll keep it from getting clogged at the sort of the slats on those glass lily pipes. But I don't like lily pipes. they break. They're hard to get off and clean, and they break. It's not so much the inflow that I have the problem with. It's the outflow for the canister filters, because you have to take those actually off the thing to clean them with the brush, with the wire brush. They're quite onerous to clean. And sometimes I'll, like after I do a big replanting, I'll talk a little bit more about this a little bit later through some of these pictures. But if I do a big uprooting or something like that of a certain area, sometimes I'll hit it with a gravel vac and just suck off the fines, the mulm, the dust off the top after I'm done. And I'll do a water change with that as well. But I'll take at least 1 or 2 buckets manually by hand, doing the old-fashioned way. But I'll still do most of the water with with that little hook thing, and I'll show you that. This tank was this picture here was a 180-gallon tank. It had this sort of cool piece of western cedar that went up and kind of went off to one side, and it was really dramatic. I saw it. I hit the brakes, ran out in the rain. I was in Northern California on the coast. I went out, grabbed it, pulled it in, and I said, I'm going to make this into my centerpiece for my 180. And that's what I did. It took a while for the wood to cure. Western cedar is kind of a tough wood to work with, but it does not rot. It lasted for a good 10 years. I finally sold it. Somebody offered me a lot of money for it, and I said, okay. Yeah. It had rotted down quite a bit too. But it lasted quite a while also. This tank, I wanted to kind of work with this new plant that came out back then, Starogini repens. And it made a nice carpet, stayed low. It was a hot plant at the time. Everybody would buy it from me. And I was able to sell a lot of it because I had a 6-foot-long tank full of it. And just the only other plant really around in this tank that I tried a lot was this Blixa. And that at the time was a fairly hot plant, easy to sell. And folks like that also. But, both these plants are kind of low growing. Blix is a little taller, grass-like. This is a broadleaf. This one's a monocot. This one's a dicot. You got different sort of hues and colors. And I wanted a place, where I had a fair amount of flow and a cool piece of wood and a lot of fat, healthy cardinals. And I had a school of 300 in here, and they got all big and fat and schooled just like you wanted them, like you would imagine them. And I never had that really kind of in my own tank, and I wanted that. And I definitely achieved it. It looked quite nice. And I really enjoyed those fish. I'll probably bring them back for a 70-gallon I'm doing. Won't be 300. It'll probably be maybe 60, 70 of them or so. But I'll be doing another abuse tank here pretty soon, if I ever get around to it. Kind of slow sometimes when it comes to doing new aquascapes, but that's how you learn. You play around with the art, and that's sort of, if you go out to the annual maintenance schedule, then you're looking at probably breaking a tank down about once a year, once every 2 years, and looking for something else. So here's that. This is the abuse tank version 2. And this is during a water change. And you can see, though, that's a abuse Cephalandra catherine. And you can see that's a very clean plant. Now, the light there is probably around at least 400 micromoles. So that's about 20% or so of full sun, which is very, very bright as far as the aquarium light goes. And you can see some white anubis in the back. They were this actual white anubis, I got it from Indonesia. They had a huge sort of virus or something that caused all theirs to melt. The main producer of this in the world. And I actually sent some of mine back. I sent 10 of them back. I bought 10 of them years ago. They were $100 each. that was back in 2008, something like that. And I ended up selling quite a few as well. They maintained their price for a long time. And then I guess it was about 2015, 16, I sent a bunch back to the supplier. They grew it out, and almost all of it's from that same genetic stock that we see today. And they have different types of it. And some of it's called, snow white, and it's almost pure white, all of it. There's some that has a little bit of green, but the new leaves are all white. It's all the same stuff. It's just the media that they use and the lighting they use gets a little bit different colors, or gets more white out of it. The more white, the more valuable it is, the easier it is for them to sell. But once you get into your aquarium, it's going to, most times it's going to turn green, unless you really limit the nutrients or you up the light or something. And trying to, grow anubis at 400 micromoles of, that's a lot of light. And so people often get a lot of algae because they can't add enough CO2 without killing their fish. Or they're not, can't do it very precisely for some reason. I've been able to do that without getting algae. The other thing is just doing these water changes twice a week like this keeps that algae off of them. So there's the trick. Maintenance, arms in the tank, basic sort of maintenance stuff that helps a lot. A lot of people they hear somebody else say, "Oh, I don't do any water changes." And it's like, well, I don't either in some tanks, but there's a trade-off with that. This plant here, this Bucephalandra, this catherine, I'd sell a plant like that for $35. And I could sell, this tank sold probably about $15,000 worth of plants in over 5-6 years. So that's a lot of money. Maybe those water changes are worth it. If you're growing rare plants and you're able to grow these sort of slow growing plants quite faster than other people and keep them nice and clean. And if you look at the color, the leaves are almost black. And that's what you get when you get much higher light. And the anubis leaves get very white. The anubis grow faster if it's greener, has more nutrients, things like that. But they look better. if they're really limited, and with the nitrogen, that usually is the case. Okay, scroll down a little bit more. Now this is a redox sort of test that was done, some research. And what it does, it shows like, all right, so you start your tank off, you put the soil in, say it's ADA aqua soil, Amazonia, type 2, whatever. Could be laden, it could be the fluvial substratum, whatever it is, the clay-based soils. This is sort of what happens initially up here at day 1. First day, the redox level is quite high. It's very aerobic. That's one way to think about this graph. The high peaks, very aerobic. The low peaks, very anaerobic. Not a lot's happening yet. There's some bacteria growing, things like that. Not the kind you want, though. What's going on here is the roots are starting to form into the soil. And at about 2 weeks in, that's sort of where it sort of starts flatlining. And sort of that say 23 days to 43 days range. But around the roots, with that first soil, you can see around the probes closest to the roots start getting spikes. And this is the roots actually sending out oxygen into the soil. And it really takes off here at day about 40 to 60 days. So a little after about 5 weeks to 8 weeks, 5 to 8 weeks, something in there is where your tank's really starting to jam, starting to do everything right. You got the bacteria, you have the roots, all sort of forming this soil biota. Once that happens, then you can back off those water changes and things will be a lot more stable. But that's the fragile part of a new setup for any tank, and particularly for planted tanks in this case. But it's also true. I mean, if you do those big water changes for just fish-only tanks, you're going to have much better results too. Also, but particularly with planted tanks, this is why we do usually suggest like twice a week or 3 times a week water changes for that first month or 2. That's a lot of work. But once you do that work, your tank's going to be lush. The plants are going to look good. There's not going to be any algae issues when you start up. You're still sort of tweaking the CO2 to get it right. Not too much where you gas your fish, not too little where you get algae. You got to find that sweet spot. And it's different for every tank. So a lot of people say, oh, it's 30 parts per million. It's like, well, for some tanks, it might be 50. Some tanks like that one with the Cardinals, it was 75. And the Cardinals were fine. They didn't mind it at all. They ate well. They were fat, happy. Plenty of people came over and saw the tank and bought plenty of plants out of it. So worked out well. But I just want to show some folks some sort of research over, starting off a tank and the results. And if you do the water changes, I think this level here will stay up higher. And the roots will actually probably grow in faster. And so these peaks where you start seeing redox go back up would move sort of be sooner rather than later like this in this soil. This is sort of a poor soil. It's not doing a very good job growing plant roots. And that's why it takes longer and the spikes aren't quite as high around the roots. Here's some happy roots. Here's some not so happy roots. Poor soil versus a good soil for aquatic plants. Okay, next one. Scroll that down. A simple device. Long before there was a Python, before that company even existed, there was this. And store owners used this, and it was just often use a regular spigot valve here, or a little quarter turn to turn it on and off. And we drain the water first using this, and there's the bottom of the tank here, or you could turn it to the side. So the post is more like that, or up higher, to pick whatever depth you want to drain it to. You'll use these just filter guards on the end so fish don't get sucked in, other large pieces of debris. So we put those in. We had 150 fish tanks there at the fish gallery there in Bloomington, Indiana, back in the 70s. Ron Simon Munich was the owner at the time. Skip was the assistant manager, and I was a grunt. I was a little 10-year-old kid, and they took pity on me and forced me into child labor. I got $2 an hour, $3 for credit, but I'd work most afternoons there for a couple of years. But we used this particular same kind of device. It was just a PVC with some fittings. Go from a garden hose fitting to a PVC fitting right there, and then just a couple elbows screwed together, long piece of pipe, T, and we just set that in there and drain it out just via siphon out the door or down a drain or out to your landscaping plants, your yard, whatever. You can direct it wherever you need fish tank water. Well, to fill it up, you just take the other end from the drain, you connect it to the faucet, get the temperature right, and then you turn this on, and then that water comes down. Instead of blasting a hole in your soil, it comes through these grates and comes out nice and gently. And that way you can refill it quite quickly. Sometimes if you have 4 tanks or so, you might drain them all first with this and then fill them up and just go from one next to the next to the next. So if you have 2 of these, John Casey was another guy that worked there. He was a couple years older than me. And he would drain them and I would fill them. And we could knock off half the store in about 2 hours. It was quite, we had it down. But if you have, say, 400 gallons worth of aquariums in your house, fresh water, you can do the same thing. You can knock it off probably in about an hour and a half or so. You can do quite large water changes fairly quick. I try and keep everything down to a couple hours. The other thing about it is you're not, while this thing is draining, you're cleaning the tank, you're cleaning the filter, you're trimming the plants, you're doing all this other stuff while that water's filling and then draining. Works out quite well. So I'm just looking. Okay, that's just about video. All right, let's go down one more. Here we go. Oh, I love this one. It's so pretty, isn't it? That was my 120. After 2 weeks of neglect, I went to the Philippines for 2 weeks and came back to that. It's pretty, real pretty. And the guy was like, so, coming by, taking care of the tank, twice a week or whatever. He's like, oh man, it's really bad. It's really bad. And he's just complaining about it. I go, well, is there water on the floor? Did you crack the tank? What happened? And he goes, oh no, there's algae all over. I go, well, what kind? He goes, well, it looks like this green hair algae. I'm like, oh, don't worry about it. And he's like, really? I go, yeah, don't worry. I'm very thankful for you just taking care of the tanks and filling up water, all that stuff. So I came over and go down to the next one. Next picture there. And 2 days later, fair amount of elbow grease. It's gone. How'd I do that? Well, I went through and pulled out each section, just to start off one section at a time, uprooted, took each plant out, cleaned it really good, put it back, replanted it, went through, did that to pretty much all this, trimmed all the plants way back, added a new CO2 gas tank since the gas tank ran out for about a week, and that's when it started getting algae, that green hair algae. Now, I've talked to people who've done this for 20, 30, 40 years, and they said the same thing. As soon as that gas tank runs out, they get hair algae. And I've heard this, repeatedly, many times. And it's just one of those things. But, got rid of it and just threw arms in the tank, elbow grease, fixing the root problem, which was the CO2, and it did not come back. Sometimes it does come back, and you did all this work, and you still didn't quite get it all for whatever reason. In such cases, you can use that Algae fix stuff from API. It's basically an herbicide, Busan 77, if you want the brand name that it's often sold as a herbicide. And it causes the cells to swell up and then burst, basically. If you dose it according to the label on the API bottle, it'll kill mostly just green hair algae. It won't kill your plants. It will kill your invertebrates. So if you have shrimp, lots of them, a bunch of crystal reds or kind of rare ones, don't use it. Or else net those out, put them in a holding tank or another tank for a little bit until the treatment's done, and then wait, do a big water change, and then after a week or two, put them back. You can do that also. Red cherry shrimp. I was like, I want to do some calling, and I won't be able to catch every single cherry shrimp without destroying the tank and ripping all the plants out. How can I kill them all? And I was like, can I use the API to kill them all, and then just net out a few high grades, and then repopulate them with just the high grades after I've wiped out everything in the tank? Didn't work. No, I couldn't kill them all. And so I've tried multiple times to wipe out the cherry shrimp population in multiple tanks, and I've totally been unable to do it without breaking the entire tank down, something like that. No way. But yeah, you could use that also. That product also works. It doesn't harm any plants that I've seen if you use as directed. That's what soft water. I have similar water to San Francisco here. We get it from the same place, the Sierras. Ours comes down the American River. Yours comes down Hetch Hetchy in a big long pipe. You're supposed to be getting some well water apparently mixed in too. Okay, next picture down. Thanks for that. This is a big tank we did 2015-16 for Amazon up at their corporate headquarters in Seattle. The tank's 17 feet long, and I tried some other aquascapes, some other things. It kind of got loose here, and it's kind of out of hand. The aquascape itself. There's three main sort of large lava rocks that we used as sort of aquascaping, but it's so long and weird and so far away you can't sort of see some of the detail here. But one of the things they wanted was to add this green wall on the back and then have the tank, and they wanted to blend those two together. That was the goal, and we did that quite well. I installed the lighting here. The Hort people up there, they did these 400-watt LEDs for the green wall. Green wall's, I think, 18 feet by, not 18, it's like 12 feet by 20-something feet, something in there. But it looks really nice, and the lights are Kessels, those Kessel 360s, and the ferns and everything hide the stands. And I glued special blocks onto the tank, and then just clamp the lights onto that, and you don't even see them, and they blend in really nicely, and you don't see the fish lights actually hardly at all. You can see them just because of the bright on here, but most people don't even notice them. It's like, oh wow, that's for the fish. Okay, so let's go down one more. So that's the filtration for the tank. We did or Tenji did, Mark Faulkner. He used to be come to the club every once in a while. He was an aquarist at Monterey Bay Aquarium, got moved up to curator, and then started his own business. And he's done extremely well doing these large installations for zoos and Bass Pro fishing shops, other public aquariums, things like that. We used some pretty cool stuff in here. Over on this side, on the far right side, it's sort of out of view, is the reservoir for the green wall. And Ben Ivan's one of the main people up there that does that. But this is a large sump with a cone-shaped CO2 reactor, and it's probably one of the few tanks anywhere in the world that uses one. It's based on the oxygen saturators that are used for large-scale fish production, but we used it for CO2, and it's probably the most efficient way to kind of do it. It's, you know, if you think about the cone-shaped skimmers and things like that, it's sort of based on some of those ideas also, but it helps fully saturate and get 100% of your CO2 dissolved before it goes back to the tank. We used abyss pumps. You know, we used to design this. They used a SketchUp, engineering SketchUp thing for this, and to get it to fit, we had to get it to fit also. So we have a 20-pound CO2 tank, and then they've got a little sort of storage room, security room around the side where we keep some of the other items. This has an automated water changer. It has a pump that sends the drains right here, and the pump sends the water down, and then a float valve just fills it right back up. And it changes about 10% of the water daily. So there's no water changes done on this. So the person that did the maintenance for a while, all they did was come in and do the trimming, clean the glass, other things like that. You weren't really doing too much else. You could still do a manual water change and do 40, 60, 70%. There's a lot to be said there for that. I definitely see noticeable differences. Like you do a manual water change, drop it down 40, 70% versus doing these automated water changes. You get a lot better results, I think, overall, especially on higher lighted tanks. Some lower lighted tanks where you're using ferns, mosses, things like that, not so much. But at higher light levels, they seem to do much better if you expose them to air at least once a week. Yep. Okay, let's see what else we got there. Yeah, well, if you can't grow it in the water, well, you can grow it on the soil. This is just a ADA soil. This is HC, Hemianthus calicoides, some cereal stone, and I just grew this outside. And I was going to fill it up, and I was like, I kind of like it this way. I don't have to do anything. What am I going to do? Put a little filter on there, put a few small fish. Yeah, they can swim around. Maybe put a beta in there. Who knows what? So one of the things, let me pull back here. This tank is just a little, 2.5 gallon Mr. Aqua. It works quite nicely for small nano tanks, things like that. But you can grow plants out like this first, and then fill it up, and then flood it. Add the CO2, all that stuff, and have it all ready to go. So you can deliver these small tanks and grow them out in large scale, actually, on a rack somewhere outside or greenhouse, or under fluorescent lights first, and then bring them to clients, and then stores, put them in Target, wherever, and then sell these things and do a kind of a large scale sort of a maintenance business if you want it with these smaller tanks, and it works quite well. We tried that in some cases, and did work. It's not my passion. My only passion really is the just doing the designs and planting and waiting for them to grow out. I like that part. Selling them to shops or auto dealerships or whatever. Not really my thing. I think that might be one. No, there's another one coming up. One more. But it kind of gets back to this. Getting the arms in the tank, maybe the rest of you. This was a lot easier. swimming in the tank and kind of floating like that, then hanging from the top here down into a 48-inch deep tank and getting blood rushes to your head, and you get a headache, and your gut gets sort of slipping over that all the time, gets beaten up pretty good. It was just easier to kind of go down in here and do this, to do the planting and everything else. And it was also, it was cool. It was kind of hot there, 90 degrees, 95 degrees, lights on you, things like that also. And so this is just nice to kind of get in the water with the fish. And it's pretty big discus too. He had discus and angels together in this tank, which is kind of a no-no, but he was like, oh, I think that's cool. I'm like, oh, okay. But yeah, we did this also did that with Tenji, with Mark Faulkner as well. This one was done back 2005, I think we did this. Around 2006, actually. It was 2006. The client still takes care of the tank. And it's not auto water changer. He has a 2-inch valve, two 2-inch valves to fill and refill, and he has a 1,000-gallon RO unit in the back, reservoir, and he can use that to fill up the tank. Tank's about 1,200 gallons, so that RO unit won't quite fill it up if you want to do a full 100% water change. So he has some tap water that can come in also. The lights, he wanted extra lights, and ended up only turning on the main lights for an hour a day because he didn't need them. And the tank got algae and other things if he turned them on much more than an hour. There's 4 1,000-watt halides up there. And, the bulbs are as big as your head. And it got so hot up here, I was like, man, you got to cool this off because this is going to cook the tank. And you're going to have even worse algae. And so we had a guy put in one of those mini split air conditioning units up in here. And then we ran the unit condenser and coils outside. So it's outside. But yeah, this was pretty well designed. Could have done some other execution to it. It's a mess up top. That could be replaced by LEDs today. Hardscape is still in the tank though. Like he had Hiko Blair come over and do some planting for him or something like that, and he likes discus a lot. So, and, Hiko Blair's, supposedly, the only one who's ever discovered discus in the world, according to some people. But he wanted him to do it, I guess recently. Better him than me. I spent enough time in that tank. So these are just some sort of musings, but I think the important thing to think about is really just the arms in the tank. That's why I have these sleeveless shirts all the time. Everybody knows why you wear those. It's like, well, I'm always in the tank. My arm is in the tank. If the guy comes in with a suit with cuffs down to here, he's not going to get in the tank that day. He's there to sell you something, or he's got a hot date, or he's got another job he needs to go to soon thereafter. But he's not going to be doing too much work in your tank. He's not going to be doing too much then. And if you got short sleeves, well, then you got smaller tanks. Big tanks, though, where you're leaning over. Yeah. Always hire a tall, skinny guy, too, so you can kind of get in there. And some of those deeper tanks, and you can hold him by the ankles while he does the work. Not people like me.
No, I swear by the definitely the sleeveless shirts. I have this one pair that I use to clean tanks too as well. It's just because I'm so used. When you use sleeves, it just goes right down, and you're like, oh man, why did I do that? So we've got a few questions for you, Tom, okay. And so almost going back to the beginning, but this is my personal question. I mean, this is what I love doing this because I can ask questions. Is like, when do you remove like these dead leaves? Like, is it when they're yellowing? Is it, I mean, it's just like any signs where the growth doesn't look that great, you just kind of go, and then the plant can kind of reinvest its energy into growing new leaves? Or What would you suggest?
Well, kind of those yellowing leaves, dead leaves. Some people just wait for it till they float, and then they take the net and scoop it off. Um, some people can be a lot more fastidious about it, and they're going to pick off each little thing with a pair of tweezers. Some plants, such as like these Ericarilon cuspidatums, kind of a rare, at least in the U.S. and elsewhere, and especially in the habitat. That's where it's the rarest, unfortunately. These plants are, $150, $200 each. They're good size. They kind of look like an aquatic green bromelid, and their leaves get they get sort of translucent, and then they start turning brown and finally yellow. But I'll usually pull those off. Or you get flower stalks on Ericarilons. I'll pull those off also. Some leaves, like old Buse leaves, things like that, Anubis, if they get any algae on them, I'll trim them off. I'll pinch them off or just cut them off with a pair of scissors. Because at that point, they're not really giving the plant anything else. And the plant's not defending that. It's not growing enough, or it's been there too long, something. And it's not doing too well. And so the plant's not defending that area from the algae. And so it's just, you may as well cut it off. It's not giving the plant anything else. It's just giving a home for the algae, basically, at that point.
Got it. And then, so let's get into some of our viewers' questions. We'll start with Jeff, one of our members from the Aquarium Society. Where do you get your CO2 tanks filled? You must go a lot.
I've tried a couple places. I used like a fire supply place, and they would fill the tanks up right there while you wait. Their prices sort of slowly creeped up, and especially on just the CO2 stuff, because they had people coming over and so they became a little piggish about it as far as the prices. And there's an old saying, pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. And eventually they became hogs. And so then I went over to another welding supply place, a local company, not like Praxair or something like that, a large outfit, but a small, reputable welding place. And they just do the tank exchange, so I don't have to do any hydro testing or anything else. They take care of that once you hand off the tanks. And they just give you new tanks each time. And Barnes Welding, I think it's like off of it's up here in Sacramento, but yeah, you can go to welding shops, wherever you can get the best price, basically, and it's close by, good service. They don't gouge you too much, things like that. That's where. Other thing you can do is just in between, if you can't get your CO2 or whatever, go ahead and get a do-it-yourself CO2 with the yeast and things, small tanks, and or just a proof of concept. I always tell people, if you don't believe me, try it for 3 months. Try growing plants with CO2 for 3 months. Use a 10-gallon or 20-gallon tank. Pick your plants, put them in the gravel, add a little bit of ferts, add a little bit of fish, cleaner fish, things like that. Add that CO2 gas, and then see what you think, because it's people more worried about adding the fertilizers, which might only give you maybe 50 to 200% more growth, whereas the CO2 is going to give you 1,000 to 2,000% more growth. They just don't realize adding it to submerged systems is really going to amplify the growth of the plants. I didn't think that either myself. I was the same way. Like, we got CO2 in the air. Terrestrial plants don't need it. Why these guys do? But reality is, it definitely makes it a lot different to garden. These plants really thrive and grow well, and you can sell them, make money. So if you grow plants really well and you got nice scapes, then you can make a lot of money on the side just selling plants. You can easily make $1,000 with 4 good sized tanks every month.
Now it gives us a good transition to our next question by Wild Sprig, who was saying, well, everything looks great in the beginning, things are growing, but then it's like, wow, how do you tamp down the trimming, or because I guess when you have a high-tech tank and it's really growing, it's like, oh man, there's a lot of maintenance in the trimming aspect. Is there any easy way around it, or is it just?
Oh yeah, there's definitely easy ways around it. You can switch out to like butze. Have a big thing of butze on one side of your tank. Now you've got half as much work. The other thing you can do, I mean, you can switch out different species of plants that just grow low or spread, like, carpet type plants. They still need trimming, things like that, but not near as much as the stem plants. If you have a tank full of stem plants, best thing to do there is to use less light, and then things grow slower. Higher light, faster growth. That's pretty much a cardinal rule there. I think the other thing really is to kind of use hardscape to define your sort of layout and your shape. And as those plants grow up, you just trim them around that shape, that hardscape. Say it's a rock that kind of goes like this through your tank. And you can just trim it based on that and just keep it a little bit below that. And then the next 2 or 3 weeks, you watch them grow up and you get this pretty growth, looks great. And then you trim them again. And it doesn't take long. Once you get good at it, and once you kind of know where you're going to trim and things, it shouldn't take you more than, while you're doing your water change, you should be able to trim it right before and then do your water change and then net off the leftover leaves and trimmings with the net. And then, it shouldn't take you any more time than I'm talking like for a 20-gallon or maybe a 40-gallon tank, something like that. If you got a 200-gallon tank, well, you signed up for work. If you're adding CO2 and lots of light and stem plants, and that's going to hurt you. I like, things like crypts. I like Iricarillons. Those are like some of my main plants that I like, and they don't grow up like that. I keep a few stems kind of in the back because they have the color or the texture I like, things like that. But ultimately, it's the same thing with bonsai as well. You get this beautiful tree all done nice, and then a year later, you haven't done anything to it except water it and add a little fertilizer. And now you got a bush, and you watch somebody trim it on YouTube or whatever and do the trimmings. And eventually you come back and open it up out of the middle, see the branches, develop it, clean up the soil, trim it out, rewire some things. Now you've got a bonsai again. It's the same thing, but it's just in a different area. And there's a lot of similarities between that, gardening, whether you got a vegetable garden or whatever. I think a lot of times, folks want to try and keep the aquascape a little too long. And to get good at aquascaping, you got to practice. And same with bonsai. I've got like Shimpaku bonsai out here. I've got 50 I did last week, and I got to do another 50 this week. So, if you're doing, 100 trees, just on one type, one species, then you'll get good at it. Just a matter of time. The more you practice, same way with guitar, you don't just pick it up and I'm going to play like Jimi Hendrix, man. And, no, you're going to have to practice quite a bit to get there. But once you do, then things are going pretty well. And, but you earned it. You earned it. And same way with bonsai, same way with aquascaping, same way with guitar, same way with the damn college degrees, everything else. So, or your job, or pay, you start off, $2 an hour, Right. I don't make that anymore, but fortunately.
Well, talking about time, we are running close, so I want to make sure I get all these questions. So Roy from the Greater Seattle Aquarium Society dropped in, and he actually asked, what substrate are you using now?
I'm just using Amazonia. I mean, I'm close to Aquaforest. Steve and George have known me since they opened, and I've sent people their way, and I like the product. It works good. There's a lot of reasons why I like it. I mean, I can qualify that as well, but it might be a little beyond the scope of time here. That's the Buse tank at one point. There's some Pygmaea here, type of Pygmaea. Pygmaea is like Brownie Ghost 2010, 2011. all those. It's all that same species, but they're just sort of different varieties. But there's a little bit of it there in the middle on the substrate that's growing, and a lot of it grew out of that. But there's other varieties, but most of it's actually, all the Catherine are up on the wood there. I'm doing something sort of similar but different coming up here. The tank's actually right now, there's no hardscape in it. It's just about I don't know, good 8 inches deep of solid buse and more buse under buse, and it's just a grow tank right now at the moment, but everything's ready to go. I've got the wood soaked and everything else. I just need to pull it out and remove the soil. I just got some soil Wednesday actually from Aquaforest Aquarium for redoing the tank. I needed the soil, so I haven't been able to get it, and COVID-19 prevented some containers from getting from Japan to here, and it's the same thing with Akadama also in Japan as well. I couldn't get any. I needed a bunch for repotting a bunch of things, and then for a client up in actually Amazon up in Seattle wanted to use like 7 cubic yards of it, and we couldn't get it because nobody had it. Nobody wanted to sell their stock for that year, and they didn't know when they could get it from Japan again. So went hunting around for that too. But Akadama is very similar to the ADA. It's been fired though at 300 degrees Celsius for an hour. But the raw material that's used before it's fired is very similar to ADA aqua soil.
Okay. What is your favorite auto water change system right now, as far as something special?
I would say it's probably a semi-automated system, something where you just turn a valve, drains all the water, turn it off, it stops it at a certain level. And you have sort of a fail safe where the pipe's up a little bit higher. So, you got at least a few inches so the fish aren't, dry if you walk away and forget. And then auto fill. And then you have what I call an oh shit overflow in your sump. And, it's a little bit below the top of the sump, and the water goes out there and goes down the drain if you keep leaving the water on. And you wander off and do something or get distracted for whatever reason. That's probably the best system, I think, for me. And if you could just run a pump and then just have a float valve when you leave for your vacations, things like that, and do that, that would work good. So I like having both, what I call semi-automated, where you just turn a valve, turn another one, and then you have a fail safe as well for both the low level and also for refill. That's a really good system. And then sort of an automated system also, where you have that in conjunction with the semi-automated. We did that for, we wanted to do that for that one client in Beverly Hills, that big 12-foot tank where you see me swimming in it. Mm-hmm. We did do that for a couple of the Amazon tanks. We did do that. So, but yeah, I don't have that though. I mean, I have in my house, but I've got concrete floor, so I can't come up through the floor. I'd have to come down from the top and then come back up with the drain. It'd be kind of weird. I could do it though. I might do it eventually, but I'm trying to figure out where to put the tanks and things like that. So I'm still just doing the hose hook like we did at the fish gallery back in 1970s. So not any different, no high tech stuff there when it comes to water changes on my own tanks. So unfortunately, not yet.
Now we got a couple questions about water parameters. You're in the Sacramento area?
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff and Jordan were asking is just what are the water parameters like in Sacramento? And is the tap water okay just for water changes, or do you do anything special with tap water?
Nah, I've never really done too much to whatever tap water I've been dealt. But I've had the opportunity to move around quite a bit, even around the Bay Area. Like Marin will have a KH of 5.5, 6, something in there. They get a lot of water from Russian River now. Very little is actually from, the reservoirs there. But then they put up all these signs saying, "Oh, you can't come in here. It's for the water supply." It's like, you guys don't even use that, man. I swim in the Russian River, we go canoeing down it and, stuff like that. But yeah, no, the Sacramento water is around KH, varies from about 17, 18 degrees up to, this is alkalinity, or KH, 17, 18 degrees. That's about 1 degree. KH up to about 2 to 5, around 30, something in there. So not quite 2 degrees. KH. GH is pretty, it does sort of the same thing, goes from about 2 degrees up to about 3, something in there. It's kind of lean on the magnesium, richer on the calcium. That's standard thing. Go to Davis, KH is around 16. GH is around 18, but it's 52 parts per million of magnesium. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, it's really high, really, really high. I've never seen anybody get that crazy with the magnesium in planted tanks or any freshwater system. You might find some cases of where somebody, for African rift cichlids or something, but yeah, it's really hard water. It's like the Midwest, and that's a cichlid belt for good reason, because all the tap water's got all that limestone back there.
That's a nice graphic right now we have up. Keegan was able to pull up. I guess is that the Cardinal tank, but then with that piece of wood?
Yeah, and so you can see the wood, and moss doesn't look really good on it, and I ended up taking it off. There's some what used to be called Australis stellata. That was sort of a hard plant back then. Now it's a weed. Nobody cares about it. This is if it's got that, I had a canister underneath, and so it has no pipes anywhere on the tank, and it just has, this is the intake, and it goes down through some ocean clear canisters. They sort of pleated 25 square foot or 15 square foot pleated cartridges, and then it comes back up. And I used a Mozzie Venturi valve to add the CO2 to this, and it added this like kind of frothy mist. This was my first reiteration of the filter, and I said, screw it, man. I'm tired of cleaning those type filters, and went to sumps finally. But yeah, this is an old glass cages tank, and it was really done poorly. It was built strong, but the edge work on it was just lousy. And so I sold it, and actually got more money out of it than I paid, because the prices went way up on rimless tanks. Mm-hmm. It's a 500-pound tank, and I had to buy the suction disc just to move it. I moved it a lot like piano. So, but the buyers bought it, and they were happy, and they didn't come back and say, I want my money back. So that's good. But this gives a good idea of what that Starogini did. And I paid $10 each for each little stem, and I bought 4 of them. And they all grew from that 4 stems into this. It took a few months, but as it grew out, I just gave it more space, because it was a rare, expensive plant and everybody wanted. And then, you give a nice picture like this, big lawn of this, rather than just a couple stems, in a bucket, selling stuff. This sells a lot better than just, a poor aquascaped example. So the better you can scape something, the better your sales will be. It's the same with fish. If you got a school of big, beautiful, pigeon discus, they're going to sell. If you got just sort of one little scraggy one that's got a big eye and a little body and, kind of poor finnage, nope, that's not going to sell. You need nice examples of the plants and the fish or the shrimp. My tanks have a lot of shrimp in them, although you can't usually see them in a lot of cases. But I do have a lot of shrimp, mostly red cherry shrimp. Shrimp judges have come over. Some international ones as well, and they've raved about my shrimp, and I'm like, man, I can't kill them. I'm trying to get rid of them so I can, do a little bit better on my genetics. But they're like, oh man, you just pick out a few of those, take them to the show, and you'll be fine. I'm like, nah, I'm not that into the shrimp. I like them as cleaners. They're cute. I like to breed them. I will say this as far as shrimp go, as far as filters, canister filters will suck them in. Some of them will live through that. But the best way to call them, I found, is with the sock filters in the overflows. And I put a stainless steel mesh on my overflows to minimize only the tiniest ones will get through that way, not the adults or decent sized ones. So they all collect in the filter sock though. And then I change the filter sock and I just tap it after I've let all the water drain out, pull it up, and then I'll just tap it in a bucket or back into the tank or into one of my 20 gallons out there. And you'll see, about 30 or 40 of them come down each time. So I'll cull basically 40 or 50 shrimp a week out of just one tank. So you get quite a few. And then, I don't like shipping shrimp though. So I'll sell them locally to folks and, usually $50 for, 50 shrimp, something like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's a picture right there with some of those red cherry shrimp right there. They look great.
The cockroaches of the aquarium, but they eat everything. They eat all the little pieces and stuff. And those are another plant, Aerocarillon ragnagnieri, rats, as they sometimes, arrow rats, they call them sometimes. But these were just the little baby ones. They get bigger, they get a little bit more typical shape of arrows, but when they're like that size, they're real cute and everybody loves them. And so I sold quite a few of those. Usually get about 25 each out of each one of those little plants, and they'll double. You can double those about every 2 to 4 months. You can double those, so you can get quite a bit of money off those. But eventually, the market sort of saturates on certain plants, and then you got to go to the next new plant. So you're always looking for the new plant. Incredibly, we've had, each year we come out with, somebody finds something cool or new in India and the Western Ghats, or somebody goes down to Colombia, finds something, or some hillbilly out in North Carolina finds a new type of Liguiga spirocarpa that's a mini type that stays nice and short rather than tall and leggy and is a problem. Or you might find a new variety of a plant that you thought that you knew and you had trouble with, and you try this other variety and it's like, oh, this is easy to grow. Ammonias, there's two different groups of ammonias that do that. One's the gracilis, and then there's two types of gracilis. Here's a tank, a non-CO2 tank. So there you go. If you don't like trimming and doing all that, you just build your wood up like this in a nice hardscape. Then you just drop some moss on it. Moss grows onto the wood, acts as a planting media, and then you can put some anubis and pennywort. And the pennywort sort of is just growing. That's on the back side of the tank, on the outside, not on the inside. Wow. And here I've got a lily pipe, and it's nice and dirty because that's the way they are. And I had a bunch of zebra plecos in here, and then I think I did something stupid with bleach, and they all got killed.
Ouch.
Yeah, it was like $1,200 a fish. I grew more plants, and I didn't get thrown in the poorhouse. I was very upset, though. That was one of my most upset I've been about killing fish, but it was my fault. So.
Zebraplex.
Couldn't save any of them.
We have one technical question about controllers, like to monitor water parameters or manage lights. I mean, is there anything that you're using in terms of a good controller?
No, I don't really like controllers. I like meters, and just, I'll leave a pH meter out when I'm dialing in the CO2. Once the tank sort of stabilizes, getting familiar with the plants growing, I don't even need it because I'm just looking at the plants at that point. I can look at the plant. I mean, after, 10 years, 15, 20 years, whatever, look at the plants and you'll know. Okay. You don't need to really rely so much on, test and measurements. You know what you did or what you didn't do. You can look and tell. You need to get in there and clean the tank. You don't even need to test. You can just do the big water change and add the ferts back, and you know exactly your ppm, so you don't need to test any of that. CO2 is really the only other thing. Maybe pull out the soil once a year, once every 2 years, something like that, if things are slowing down. That's a big expense, and a lot of people don't want to do it, but it gives you an opportunity to redo and rescape, cook up a new idea that you had in the past. So, good idea.
That's maybe something I need to be doing with my tank.
We all can say this.
Here's another tank up. But I also had a question on just how are the tanks in your garage different from, because you were mentioning that you have no water changes for those. I mean, what's the experiment there? Or, like you're not running CO2 with them and you're not needing to do water changes. Is it just the type of plants you're growing in there, or how are you doing this?
I'm not exactly sure. It just, the plants grow smaller. Like the ammonia pedicellata, that it grows beautifully in there. I don't have to trim it very much, but it's, yay wide. If I put it in my tank, my 120, like this one here, it's going to grow that wide. It's going to grow fast. I'm going to have to trim it more often. I can say that probably about most of your weedy stem plants will do that sort of pattern, because it's very limited in that tank. There's not a whole lot of nitrogen. There's plenty of phosphorus and metals and all that in the soil. If it's got roots and likes that, it's going to do well. There's probably, I don't know, 10, 20 or so plants that really thrive with nothing in the water column, no water changes, and rich sediments like that. The sediment's rich in most things, but it's not rich in nitrogen, not anymore. That's the thing that gets drained out of the ADA soil more than anything. And like the Layden, the Fluval, all the other brands, they don't have the extra nitrogen. But let me tell you a little story about rice. Our agricultural commodity here in California, we grow around $1 billion worth of rice here. More than as far as volume goes, we grow more rice here than Japan does. The entire country, just here in the Central Valley around Sacramento, north to maybe Red Bluff, something in there, and that sort of around the river, going up and down. If you drive over the causeway to Sacramento, from Davis to Sacramento, you'll go across rice fields. They only add one thing to that rice paddy, one fertilizer, and it's liquid ammonia. Add that, and they pump it in. They plow the field first, get it all level, and then they pump it in. And as they finish pumping it in, liquid ammonia about 5 inches into the ground, with these sort of spreaders that go under the soil, little tines with and they have these. You see all these white anhydrous ammonia trucks out there, tankers full of it. They'll do that, and then they'll flood the field immediately, because they don't want the bacteria to turn that ammonia into nitrate. Ammonia will bind to the soil particles, but nitrate will not. Nitrate will go and out the water. They'll just go into the water table or down the stream, something like that. The ammonia will stay put. If you flood the field, you deprive all that bacteria of oxygen. And within like a day, they'll come along with a plane and they'll wet seed the entire field with an airplane. And they'll basically pre-germinate it, and then they'll put it into this sort of tank, and they'll spray it, all the rice grains, down onto the field. And then they'll grow. And they do that in May. Usually last day in May through probably September, October, and then you're done. And that's the growing season here for rice. And that's what they do. They only add one thing, because that wetland soil, that rice paddy soil, is rich in all the iron, all the trace metals, phosphorus. Nitrogen is the only thing that will, it can, basically, it'll break down into gas through bacteria and other processes in the wetlands. And that's what it is. It's just a wetland area that we converted into rice production. But we still have the birds, still have the waterfowl coming up and down, coming following those rice paddies, just like it would a regular rice or regular wetland. But there's a lot more food for them too because of the leftover rice, and so you see all the birds. But the rice paddy soil and ADA soil almost identical as far as nutrients, and as far as composition and sort of texture as well. And so if you just took that stuff, rolled it into the little balls in a roller, they have these machines that cut the clay soil into little sort of cubes, little small predetermined cubes and sort of these screens. And then that goes down, dries out a little bit, and then they roll it and turn the cube into a round ball. And then you can make your own stuff. But they added the ammonia probably just based off of a rice paddy idea and using that because it grew plants really well. And let's just try that. And it worked quite well. And so I would, definitely give, Amano a big credit for pushing that. He started off with like the power sand and some other stuff. And I think a lot of people were trying different things like that. But to go ahead and actually use a soil, a clay soil, and it didn't cloud the water too much. It does make a mess in some ways compared to like gravel, but it was still kind of a novel thing. It's using the idea of akadama, but just not the cooked stuff. Mm-hmm. They had everything there to make it. The U.S., we do have a few of those machines floating around somewhere, and I'm supposed to get together with somebody and we can make some domestically here, but a lot of the places they kind of look at the ammonia as a bad thing, and it's not when it comes to growing plants. You need it. That's the one thing that makes it different than all the other brands that think that the ammonia is bad. And you got to do all these water changes and stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, but you signed up for that, man. You got a fish tank. You signed up for the water changes, dude. There's no, test kits, all that. I've never met anybody that, was like, well, I got a fish tank. Well, now I got to do a lot of testing. I love that. So nobody got into it for that. You don't need to do it if you do the water changes. So,
and then here's our final request. I don't know if it's even possible because I know you're on your laptop right now. Is just any way of just checking out what your current projects are, any current tanks that you're working on, or?
I'm going to replace the non-CO2 tank I have. It's a flat 8-inch high, 24 by 18 tank with a cool piece of manzanita sticking up and out. I'm going to replace that with a vivarium. And that's one reiterate. That was when I tried to grow bald cypress indoors with a Ecotech Radion, and it wasn't enough light. And that's a very powerful light. But I can grow it great outside. I got 4 or 5 of them outside here, and they grow fine. But growing them indoors, it failed miserably. So that's all just pure Buse now. Buse do quite well with non-CO2. But that's going to be a 36-inch tall, 24 wide, 18-inch deep vivarium now. And the bottom part will be the Buse and fish. And I have a bunch of endlers, live bearers. They sort of seem to do quite well. I had white clouds, but they kept jumping out. I've tried other fish, and they jumped. Only filter I have in this tank was a little internal filter. That's it. That and the light. There's nothing else in that tank. It's a very simple tank. And it's been very successful with the Buse. And if you can find a more recent picture of that. But I'm going to switch it over, and I'll put a lot of begonias in the back. I have a green wall for the back of the vivarium. And then I have some really cool manzanita that will give some 3-dimensionality to the inside part for plants. And then I've got some other pieces of wood that I'm going to put on the bottom to allow the frogs to have some places to hang out. But that's my next project. It's actually sitting right outside the front door. And it started off in the garage, came around the corner, slower. I've been putting it off, but I've been doing clients' tanks and collecting driftwood and teaching and a bunch of other stuff. I'm way behind.
Yeah. I think he's been throwing in some of the pictures that he had taken. I think the last time he was over at your place. So I mean, but yeah, I think he was asking, is any chance we can see any of your current tanks right now? I mean,
off, the lights go off.
Oh, the lights are off. Okay, yeah. We missed our opportunity.
Nothing really cool to see yet. When you see me start posting stuff on Facebook, that's usually a sign that, yeah, I'm starting to escape and I'm okay with what it looks like. I might tear some things out yet. And, if I'm not happy with it, I'll tear it out and start again. And then, and then the bonsai will come in and I'm like, damn it, I'm going to have to do some more of this and trim. But bonsai sort of goes into rest in the winter. Mm-hmm. And there's less to do. And so I'll probably end up doing a little bit more there. Kids might be going back to school mid-October, so I don't know. At least the ones we have, the younger one. So that's a big factor too. No, that's an old tank. That's the old cube tank I had. Starogini, Portobello, and then a bunch of that's actually cypress, bald cypress wood in there. A bunch of bulbitis. That was a very simple tank. I switched it out with dwarf hairgrass, and that actually looked pretty good. Portobello was kind of hot at the moment, and I put it in there. That was just with onyx sand. That tank did quite nice. I've had several reiterations of that over the years. Used to have a bunch of Congo tetras in there, and a different piece of wood. Had another piece of Western cedar actually. Yeah, I had a real cool piece that filled up the whole area, and a bunch of Anubis and elephant nose, African-based, sort of Congo kind of based tank back then. Okay.
Would you recommend like smaller fish for these plant tanks just so that they don't add a lot of nutrient, with your feedings and things like that, the nutrient load? Or, I mean, but you're doing so many water changes that it doesn't really make a difference if you were to throw in larger fish.
Big fish tend to uproot plants too, like a bunch of big clown loaches. I love them. I did have a giant black ghost knife for a client's 350 for a few years, and it was great. And come over and come up and nose your arm a little bit and then run off because you didn't have a shrimp. Yeah, I've had quite large fish in some tanks over the years. I had gar, 1.5 foot long gar in planted tanks, but they were real peaceful and kind of mellow. I'd put in live bearers and things like that for them to eat. They'd slowly pick them off, but they never seemed really aggressive in that tank ever. Even for all the teeth and, noted predatory behavior they have, they seem very, very mellow. Small fish are often used to, if you have smaller things, little like the cherry shrimp. In this case here, we got the harlequins. They actually match really well with colorful stem plants. The harlequins are probably one of the better fish out there for that. But if you see smaller things and they're a school of something, that looks more like something you would see in nature versus a zoo where you just see two of each animal. And then, the layout also very small, big animal in a small cage, basically. Where if you see the small thing, the other thing, I talked to Amazon about this too. Some of their managers said, if you put small fish in there, people are going to run up and try and see what it is. So it's going to draw them in to the thing, and then they're going to see the other details. And then we go, oh, wow, look at that. There's shrimp in here. You're not going to see that from 5 feet away or 6 feet. You want to be drawn into the view. You don't want to be sort of left out. And that's not a mono or anybody. That's just my own sort of thoughts, when I'm trying to sell something or think about it. But I think a lot of it is, art or these choices that folks have made over the time, contrast or a certain number of plants per square, for linear foot, these sort of rules, Dutch style, they're conservative rules, and a lot of people want to break them. but they're good rules. And it's true in bonsai, very true in bonsai. And a lot of sort of aspects of Japanese culture as well, where these old conservative ways work quite well. And it's not anything like kind of Zen or spiritual or feng shui or anything else. It's just kind of a lot of it's common sense. It looks good. It is good. You kind of keep coming back to it and kind of go, well, yeah, it is good. I've tried everything else and I'm still back to the same thing. The golden ratio, where's that spot? You keep coming back to it. And it's true for the small fish too. Nice school small fish. I've had a lot of weird oddball fish. Love my catfish, things like that. But if you like pistogrammas, small, South Americans, Southeast Asians, India, African fish, things like that, even American fish, they work quite well in these planted tanks. So you can try some novel, weird things too. One of the classic ones, at least in Asia, is to put the red dragon arowana in a big planted tank.
Right.
You need a 300-gallon tank, but looks nice. They're nice fish, but man, no open top for an arowana.
No, that would not be a good idea.
Not smart.
And then I know a lot of our members tend to have smaller tanks in San Francisco. I mean, any tips and tricks as far as with just having a great planted tank that's, a smaller tank? I don't know.
Tanks are really kind of cool because they're easy to rescape. They don't, you're not like dreading redoing them. They do require more work. And one of the biggest things you need to do as far as maintenance is topping that water off, keeping that water level the same, because that's going to keep the CO2 the same. Unless you have like a sump or something, which you almost never do for smaller tanks, you're going to have to top that water off and make sure you get it just right and keep it there. And so that you're probably going to do that every 2 days, every 2 or 3 days. But it doesn't take a lot of water. You just need one little glass, or you don't need a big bucket or anything. So
if the water level drops, the CO2 concentration would be spiking up a little bit, maybe in that tank. Then
might be dropping in most cases. And so if you can stabilize that water level some way, just remember to do it, just like you do feeding the fish. Just make it really easy for you, or get a cup or one of those fish specimens containers that hang on the tank, something like that. You can grab and just throw in there. It works quite well.
Okay.
But that's one of the biggest challenges I had. I had a bunch of little nano tanks, and when I was at Davis for a little while, and I got rid of them and just went back to 20s and larger, because the evaporation, I would forget or be gone for a week and come back, and it'd be a lot of filters blasting out, dropping down into the water, causing aeration and stuff. And normally it's up there and the filters down here, and just a little bit of ripple. A huge change in the difference. And also you get a big difference in the salt levels too. Not a big deal, but doing water change on smaller tanks different too, because you're not using like the hooks and stuff like that. You do that, it pulls the whole tank off the shelf. Or a small tank like that little 2.5 Mr. Aqua I showed, something like that. Those, you got to just kind of scoop it in, or get the little tiny vacuum kind of Lee's gravel vac or something like that to do the water change. Just a little hose, something like that. That's all you need, but a bucket. But it's quick, it works, and a little bit of a hassle, but it's a small tank and you can do it pretty quick. Cost isn't much either, so you can make that tank look real nice for much cheaper actually than a bigger tank. So a lot of good things for it, or small tanks, but you do need to keep up on them a little bit more. They're not quite as stable as some of the larger tanks.
I got it.
Go ahead.
We're at the 1 hour and 49-minute mark. I'm looking at our timer here. So definitely we've taken up a lot of your time. And so, thank you so much, Tom, for taking the time and coming in and sharing a wealth of information with us today. And we deeply appreciate it. And my gosh, I learned a lot. And I've got to plant a tank, and I'm like, okay, I know I got to clean out some leaves right now. So that's on my to-do list.
Finding motivation is a key thing, though, especially over the years. A lot of people sort of come and gone over the years in this hobby, and we've got new cohorts coming along about every 5 years. That's sort of a general thing, and so each new cohort I've been trying to work with a little bit. But yeah, it's a keeping your motivation up is definitely a key thing. Same way, less so with bonsai. I think I'm just the bonsai is a much longer term thing, and I might do something monthly to a tree at most. It's usually 2 or 3 times a year, something like that. Small planet tank. I'm gonna be doing it twice a week.
Yeah. Wow. Anybody who's interested, go to barreport.com. I'm definitely now thinking of signing up because I learned a lot, and I know there's plenty. I can learn more about my tank, so definitely.
Just a resource. If you got sort of questions, you can look around, poke around. Eventually, I should write a book on horticulture, sort of a textbook style thing for horticulture of aquatic plants.
Yeah,
I need to make a book like they're like Hartman's, sort of like something like this. Hartman's plant propagation book from horticulture, something like that from Davis, or that's probably the most common high end plant propagation book around. But I need to do something like that, and for aquatic horticulture.
There's a lot of new plants that are coming into the hobby, and I'm sure you've got a lot of experience with all kinds of different plants, and so any sage advice you have on them, that would definitely be great, and I would keep an eye out for that. So
yeah, it'll probably be more like a textbook for college course rather than a hobby-based book. We've got enough of those.
Yeah.
I need something a little more academic, I would say. And a little bit more formalized, and with citations, support for what is written, and kind of the approaches that I've found over the years as far as that work, and other people's approaches as well. I've tried most everybody's method, just to see if nothing else, and they all work. They all work for pretty much the same reason too. They just work maybe a little bit different rates as far as most methods go. But if you're having problems, things like that, do the water changes, check the CO2, all that stuff. Get your hands in the tank. Well, and get sleeveless shirt.
Yeah, that's the secret right there.
Yeah, no too poor for sleeves, so no.
Smart. Yeah,
too poor for sleeves.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tom, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And we'll see what we have wrapped up for you for next month. Thank you so much.